She showed up in Red Mesa with a dead man's toolbox and no intention of leaving. The town didn't want her. The banker already had plans to destroy her, and the man who hired her was still half buried in grief too deep to name. Brenna Hale was 24 years old, alone in hostile country, and every door in that town was about to slam shut in her face. But she had her father's tools. She had her father's hands. And she had something Red Mesa had never once encountered in a woman before. The kind of stubborn that doesn't bend. If you want to know how far this story travels, drop a like and tell me what city you're watching from. Let's find out together. The wagon rattled into Red Mesa just past noon on a Tuesday, which was maybe the worst day of the week to arrive anywhere if you were hoping for a decent reception. Brenna Hale sat on the bench beside the driver, a weathered old man named Coppins, who hadn't spoken more than 11 words since Tucson. She wasn't bothered by the silence. She'd had enough noise in the past 6 months to last her a long while. The sound of her father coughing through the walls at night, the sound of the doctor telling her there was nothing more to be done, the sound of the will being read in a lawyer's office that smelled of old paper and finality. What Calhoun Hale left his only daughter wasn't much, by most people's accounting. A small house with a leaking roof, $43. And a toolbox, long, heavy, iron-cornered, with his initials burned into the lid. C.H. Brenna had sold the house to cover the debts. She'd kept the $43 and the toolbox. She wasn't sentimental about most things, but she was sentimental about that box. Red Mesa came into view around a bend in the road, tucked between two low rises of red rock that gave the place its name. It wasn't an impressive town, a main street wide enough for 2 wagons to pass without incident, if both drivers were paying attention. A hotel with a crooked sign, a general store, a blacksmith, a church that looked like it had survived something and wasn't entirely sure how. 3 saloons, because whatever else a frontier town might lack, it rarely lacked saloons. Brenna studied it with the careful, assessing eye her father had trained into her from the time she was 7 years old, standing on a step stool in his workshop. "Look at the bones of a thing," he used to say. "Not the paint, not the shine, the bones." The bones of Red Mesa were honest, if not pretty. Solid sandstone foundations under the older buildings, decent timber framing where she could see it. The newer construction on the eastern end was rougher. Someone had been in a hurry, or working cheap, or both. "Here you go," Coppins said, pulling the wagon to a stop in front of the hotel. It was the most words he'd said at once since they left Tucson. "Thank you," Brenna said. She climbed down without waiting for help, swung her travel bag over one shoulder, and reached back up for the toolbox. It weighed nearly 40 pounds. She carried it like it weighed nothing. Coppins watched her. He seemed like he wanted to say something, reconsidered, and clicked his horse forward. Brenna stood in the street with her bag and her toolbox and looked at Red Mesa. Red Mesa looked back. The job advertisement had been printed in 3 papers across the territory, which told Brenna something about the man who'd placed it. Either he was thorough or he was desperate, or, most likely, he'd been turned down enough times locally that he'd started casting wider. Skilled carpenter wanted. Residential construction, full project. Must demonstrate competency. Inquire at the Mercer property, East Road 2 miles. Ask for Gideon Mercer. She'd read it in a Tucson barber shop where she'd gone to fix a broken chair for $2. The barber had left the paper on the table. She'd read it 3 times. She hadn't written ahead. She'd learned early that letters gave people time to build up objections. It was harder to turn someone away when they were standing in front of you with a toolbox and a steady look. Harder. Not impossible. She'd been turned away plenty with the toolbox right there, but harder. She got a room at the hotel. $6 a week, which was high, but the woman at the desk had a face that said the price wasn't going down, and asked where the East Road was. Then she put her bag in the room, picked up the toolbox, and started walking. The East Road out of Red Mesa was hard-packed dirt, running between scrub brush and low rock formations. The afternoon sun was aggressive. By the time she'd gone a mile, her shirt was damp at the collar, and she'd shifted the toolbox to her other hand twice. She heard the construction before she saw it. The clean crack of a hammer, the lower sound of a mallet, the occasional rasp of a handsaw working through timber. Good sounds. Purposeful sounds. The house came into view as the road curved around a stand of cottonwoods. It was a serious project. That was her first thought. Not a shack, not a quick-built claim house. Someone intended to live here for a long time. The foundation was stone, laid with care. The frame was up, 2 stories, substantial, with a covered porch running the width of the front. Good bone structure. But the walls weren't finished, and the roof was only halfway framed, and by her estimate, they were looking at another 3 months of work at minimum, maybe 4. A man was on the second-story scaffolding, his back to her, working a piece of ridgeboard into position. Alone up there, which was either brave or foolish, and she couldn't tell yet which. She stopped at the edge of the property. "Mr. Mercer," she called up. The man on the scaffolding turned around. He was older than she'd expected, somewhere past 40, though not by much. Dark hair going silver at the sides. A broad, angular face with the kind of weathering that came from years of outdoor work, not just weather. He was big through the shoulders, the way men who have worked with timber their whole lives tend to get. Not from trying, but from the simple accumulation of effort. He looked down at her. His expression didn't change much, but his eyes did something. "I'm not buying anything," he said. "I'm not selling anything," Brenna said. "I'm here about the carpenter position." A pause. "You're here about—" He stopped, started again. "The advertisement said skilled carpenter." It did. "I need someone who can do heavy framing, roof work, load-bearing structures." "I know what a carpenter does, Mr. Mercer." He came down from the scaffolding. She watched him descend, careful but not slow, with the ease of someone who spent a lot of time at height. He landed on the ground and walked toward her, and she could see now that he was holding a framing square in his left hand, and that his right hand had the particular roughness of someone who'd been working wood since before she was born. He stopped about 6 feet away and looked at her. Not rudely exactly, more like a man trying to work out a problem he hadn't anticipated. "Brenna Hale," she said, and put out her hand. He shook it. His grip was firm, and he didn't soften it for her, which she noted and appreciated. "Gideon Mercer." "I know, it was on the advertisement." He looked at the toolbox. "Those yours?" "My father's. Mine now." "He taught you the trade?" "He did." Gideon Mercer looked at her for a long moment. Not hostile, more like a man doing arithmetic in his head. "How old are you?" 24. Does that matter?" "Probably not." He turned and walked back toward the house. "Come here, then." Sat. He tested her. She expected that, and she didn't mind. He showed her a section of the east wall framing where he'd made a deliberate error. A structural joint that looked right on the surface but was transferring load wrong, which would cause problems in the wall once the weight of the roof was fully on it. He didn't tell her it was wrong. He just showed it to her and said, "What do you see?" She looked at it for about 15 seconds. "Your post-to-beam connection here is off," she said. "The tenon's cut short, maybe a 1/4 inch, maybe a little less. Looks fine now, but when the roof load comes down, the joint's going to work loose. 2-3 years, you'll have settlement issues in this corner." He was quiet. "You've got 2 choices," she continued. "Recut the tenon and reset the joint now, while you can still get at it cleanly. Or add a knee brace here," she pointed, "to redirect the load path and take the stress off the bad joint. The brace is faster, the recut is cleaner." Gideon looked at the joint, then at her. "What would you do?" he said. "Recut. Always better to fix the thing than manage around it." Something shifted in his expression. Not dramatically. Gideon Mercer didn't appear to be a man given to dramatic expressions, but something settled. "Show me your kit," he said. She opened the toolbox. Calhoun Hale had been particular about his tools. Everything had a place. Everything was maintained. The chisels were sharp and clean. The planes, a jack plane, a smoothing plane, a shoulder plane, were adjusted correctly and rust-free. The squares were true. The draw knife blade was honed to a clean edge. Gideon picked up the shoulder plane, examined it, set it down, picked up the marking gauge. His hands moved over the tools the way a man's hands move over things he understands. "Good kit," he said. "My father was careful. You too, looks like." He set the marking gauge back in its place. "What's your day rate?" she told him. He didn't flinch. "I'll need you 6 days a week, Sundays off. Work starts at first light." "That's fine. I'll tell you now. There are going to be people in this town who have opinions about a woman on a job site. There are people in every town who have opinions about a woman on a job site. These particular people are louder than most. Brenna looked at him steadily. Mr. Mercer, I've been turned away from 14 jobs in the past 2 years because of what I am. I'm still here. I'm still working. I'll survive the opinions of Red Mesa. He studied her for a moment. Then he nodded, once with the finality of a man who had made a decision and was done deliberating. You start tomorrow, he said. She found out about the history of the house that evening, from the woman who ran the hotel dining room, a broad-shouldered, talkative woman named Vera Suggs, who seemed to treat the dinner hour as an opportunity to provide a general briefing on everything relevant about Red Mesa. Mercer's building that house for his late wife, Vera said, setting a plate of beans and cornbread in front of Brenna without being asked if she wanted it. Well, he started it for her. She passed 2 winters ago. Consumption. They'd been living in the old place. You saw the small cabin just east of the build site, I expect. Brenna had noticed it. A weathered one-room structure. I saw it. He started the big house the year before she took sick. They were going to have a family, fill it up proper. Then she died. Vera sat down across from her with the ease of someone who owned the place, which she did. He stopped construction for almost a year. People figured he'd quit the whole project. Then he started up again in spring, alone mostly. Hired a couple of men from town, but they quit inside a month. Said he was, she paused, choosing her word, difficult. What kind of difficult? The quiet kind. Doesn't explain himself. Has standards. Vera said that last word with a particular weight that suggested standards, in Red Mesa, were considered an eccentricity. The men he hired were used to good enough. Mercer doesn't do good enough. Brenna ate her beans. What's the town's issue with the project? Vera's expression shifted. Something more careful moved across her face. That's a longer conversation. I've got time. Silas Whitmore, Vera said, and the name landed in the room with a particular kind of weight. He's the banker here. He and his wife Ruth are, she seemed to search for the right word, consequential people, town pillars, the kind of pillars that hold things up by making sure certain things stay down. And Whitmore has a problem with Mercer's house. Whitmore has a problem with anything he doesn't control. Mercer's property sits between Whitmore's land on one side and the irrigation channel on the other. If Mercer's build goes forward, Whitmore loses his clean run to expand eastward. Vera stood, picking up her own cup. And now Whitmore's going to have a problem with you specifically. A woman carpenter. Ruth Whitmore is going to have views, Vera said, and there was something tired and knowing in how she said it. Views that she will share, loudly, with everyone who will listen and some who won't. Brenna finished her cornbread. Thank you for the warning. It's not really a warning, Vera said, moving back toward the kitchen. More of a preview. She arrived at the build site as the sky was just starting to lighten in the east, that deep blue hour before the sun actually commits to anything. She'd walked the 2 miles from town in the dark, the toolbox in one hand and a lantern in the other. Gideon was already there. He was working by lamplight on the porch framing, fitting a section of ledger board with the concentrated patience of a man who had learned not to hurry things. He looked up when she came around the cottonwoods. You're early, he said. So are you. He considered this as an adequate answer and went back to what he was doing. She set her toolbox down, rolled her sleeves up, and looked at the east wall. The bad joint was still there. She'd half expected him to deal with it himself overnight. He hadn't. I'll start on that recut, she said. I know where the timber chisels are. I have my own. She did. She'd noticed the quality of his tools the day before, good tools, well maintained, but she preferred to work with her father's kit when she could. She found the joint, measured, set up her reference marks, and started in. Gideon worked on the porch framing. She worked on the east wall joint. For 2 hours, the only sounds between them were hammers and chisels and the occasional measurement being called out. And the silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of people who are both focused, who both know what they're doing, who don't need to fill the air with noise to prove they're working. It was the best kind of silence there was. By mid-morning, she'd recut the tenon and reset the joint, cleaned it up with the shoulder plane, and pinned it with a drawboard peg that would only get tighter with seasonal movement. She stood back and looked at it, clean, solid, right. Let me see, Gideon said from behind her. She stepped aside. He crouched and examined the joint with the same close attention he'd given her tools the day before. pressing his palm flat against the mating faces, checking the alignment with his eye, running his thumb along the peg. He didn't say anything for a while. "Good," he finally said. Coming from Gideon Mercer, she was already learning good was not a small word. Bros. The trouble started on the third day. She'd been walking back from the lumber yard on the north end of town, where she'd gone to check on a materials order Gideon had placed 3 weeks prior, when she passed 2 women on the boardwalk in front of the general store. She didn't know them. They knew her. She could tell by the way the conversation stopped. She nodded. One of them nodded back, uncertain, like she hadn't quite decided whether courtesy was appropriate. The other one looked straight through her. She kept walking. That afternoon, the owner of the hardware store, a thin, precise man named Aldous Grubb, told her that the order of cut nails she'd come to pick up wasn't ready. "Mr. Mercer placed this order 8 days ago," she said. "I'm aware. He was told it would be ready by Tuesday. There have been delays." She looked at him. He looked slightly to the right of her, at a point on the wall that apparently required his attention. "What kind of delays?" she asked. "Supply issues." "From where?" "Your supplier is in Flagstaff. I know because I checked the invoice on the copy Mr. Mercer keeps. The Flagstaff shipment runs every 10 days and it ran 4 days ago, which means those nails arrived." Aldous Grubb's jaw tightened. "I'll have them ready by end of week." "We need them tomorrow." "End of week," he said, and his voice had the flat, dull finality of a man who'd been told what to say and was saying it. She left without the nails. She didn't tell Gideon right away. She thought about it on the walk back, the way Grubb had looked at the wall, the deliberateness of it, the sense that this wasn't about nails at all. It was about something that had already been decided somewhere else, by someone else. Whitmore, she thought, and she thought about what Vera had said, views that she will share. She waited until they were finishing for the day, when the light was going gold and long across the frame, and Gideon was putting his tools away with the systematic care he brought to everything. "Grubb's holding the nail order," she said. Gideon didn't look up from his toolbox. "Since when?" "He told me end of week. I think that's not really about the nails." Gideon closed the toolbox and straightened. He had a look she was beginning to recognize, not anger exactly, but something compressed and very controlled, like pressure in a vessel that was well built but had limits. "Whitmore," he said, "that was my thought." He was quiet for a moment. "He's done this before. Last fall it was the lumber yard. The Flagstaff supplier suddenly couldn't fill our frame timber order. I had to go to Holbrook, paid more and waited 3 weeks. He's trying to slow us down. He's trying to stop us." Gideon picked up his toolbox. "But the thing about slow is it only works if you stop." He started toward the cabin. "I'll go talk to Grubb in the morning." I'll go." He said it without heat, but with a finality that closed the subject. "You've been here 3 days. Let me handle Grubb." She thought about arguing, decided not to. Not yet. The Whitmore campaign, when it fully arrived, was more coordinated than she'd expected. By the end of her first week, she knew the shape of it. She'd been turned away from the lumber yard, politely, with apologies, but turned away. 3 women she'd seen at the general store had stopped talking when she walked past, and then started again at a slightly higher volume, the way people do when they want you to know they're talking about you. And the man who ran the feed store on the south end of Main Street, she had no business with him, but she passed his place on her walk to the job site, had watched her from his doorway every morning with an expression that made her think of a man waiting to see whether a storm would pass or make landfall. On Friday of that first week, she was measuring window rough openings on the 2nd floor when she heard voices below. She kept working, but she listened. A woman's voice, clear, carrying, the voice of someone accustomed to being heard, said, "I simply think it raises questions about the project's legitimacy, Gideon. The town committee has standards." "The town committee approves building projects," Gideon said. His voice was flat. "Not personnel decisions. But when those personnel decisions reflect on the community..." "Mrs. Whitmore," Gideon said, and the way he said it was not rude, but it was the verbal equivalent of a door gently but completely closed. "Brenna Hale is on this job because she's skilled, because she showed up, and because I hired her. That's the whole story. There isn't another part of the story." A pause. "Silas will be speaking to the committee," the woman said. Silas can speak to whoever he likes. A beat. Are you done? She heard footsteps receding, then silence, then Gideon's voice from below. Brenna. She looked down through the floor opening. He was standing at the base of the ladder, looking up. You heard that, he said. Some of it. Ruth Whitmore. I assumed. He looked at her steadily. You should know. This isn't the last time. And it's going to get louder before it gets quieter, if it gets quieter. I know. I want to make sure you're not... He seemed to search for the right word. It wasn't a short search. Gideon Mercer, she was learning, did not use words casually. I want to make sure you know you have a place on this job, whatever they say. She looked down at him from the second floor, this serious, solitary man with his dead wife's unfinished house, and his refusal to be moved by people who thought they moved everyone. I know, she said. Thank you. He nodded, went back to work. She went back to her window openings. The thing about Gideon Mercer that she hadn't expected was the grief. She'd known it was there. Vera had told her. The history of the house told her. The stopped construction and the resumed construction told her. But knowing grief is there and seeing it are different things. She saw it on a Wednesday afternoon in her second week when she was working inside on the staircase framing and Gideon came in from an errand to town and stopped in the doorway of what would eventually be the main room. Just stopped. Looked at the space. The afternoon light was coming through the empty window frames at a low angle, laying bright parallelograms across the rough subfloor. It was the kind of light that makes unfinished spaces look, temporarily, accidentally, beautiful. He stood there for about 30 seconds. She kept working, but she watched him from the corner of her eye. Whatever he was seeing, it wasn't the room as it was. It was something else. Then he walked past her to the back stairs and went up, and he didn't say anything, and she didn't ask. But that evening, when they were cleaning up and the light was going out of the sky, she found him sitting on the porch steps, the porch that was framed but not yet floored, with a cup of coffee gone cold, looking out at the cottonwoods. She sat on a sawhorse nearby, not too close. After a while, he said, Eleanor picked this site. She waited. We looked at 6 pieces of land. She walked out here and said this one inside 2 minutes. I asked her why. She said, He stopped, drank his cold coffee. She said she liked the way the light came through those trees in the afternoon. Brenna looked at the cottonwoods. The leaves were moving, that silvery flicker cottonwoods do, catching and releasing the last of the day's light. She was right, Brenna said. Gideon looked at her. Not the distant, calculating look she'd gotten on the first day. Something different, more direct and less defended. Yeah, he said. She was. They sat there for a while, not talking. The cottonwoods moved in the evening air. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the kind of silence that sometimes comes between people who have been working hard together in close quarters, where the work itself has built something, not quite trust, not yet, but the precondition of trust. Eventually, Brenna stood, picked up her toolbox, and said goodnight. She walked the 2 miles back to town in the early dark. And she thought about the way the light had come through the empty window frames that afternoon, and the way Gideon had stood in the doorway and looked at it. She thought about what it meant to build something for a person who wasn't there anymore. She thought about her father's toolbox, which she carried in her right hand, 40 pounds of iron and wood and carefully maintained steel. She thought about the things people carry. The official complaint arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a man from the county clerk's office, who rode out on a gray horse and handed Gideon a document with the practiced detachment of someone who was just the messenger and wanted to be clearly understood as such. Gideon read it. His face did very little. What is it? Brenna said, when the clerk had ridden away. Formal complaint filed with the county building committee. Lists 3 concerns. He handed her the document. 1. Questions about permit compliance. 2. Concerns about site safety standards. 3. She was reading. 3. Inquiry into the qualifications of all personnel currently employed on the project. She looked up. They're questioning my credentials. They're questioning your credentials. On what grounds? The complaint doesn't specify. That's how it works. You file the inquiry, the committee has to investigate, the investigation takes time, and during the investigation he He stopped. Issue a work suspension. That's the mechanism. Yes. She handed the document back to him. She was quiet for a moment, and she was very careful not to show what she felt, because what she felt was a white-hot particular kind of anger that she had learned over 24 years to keep behind her sternum where it couldn't cause problems until she decided what to do with it. Whitmore filed this, she said. Almost certainly, though his name won't be on it. How long does the investigation take? Depends on how much pressure the committee is under. Could be 2 weeks, could be 6. He was looking at the document. In the meantime, we're going to have a harder time getting materials, and if anyone else files a complaint supporting this one, they'll suspend the build. Yes. She looked at the half-finished house. The frame stood clean and strong in the morning light, the ridge board they'd set last week running straight and true along the peak. She thought about the bad joint she'd fixed on the first day and how it had needed to be cut out and replaced properly, not managed around. She thought about what her father always said, fix the thing, don't manage around it. We keep working, she said. Today, right now. Whatever they throw at us, we don't stop. Gideon looked at her. Something moved in his eyes. That's what I was going to say, he told her. He folded the complaint and put it in his shirt pocket, and they went back to work. By the end of her second week in Red Mesa, the house had a full roof frame. The east wall was framed and sheathed. The window rough openings were set and trued, and the staircase framing was in and solid, rising in a clean, precise line from the ground floor to the second. Brenna's hands were rougher than they'd been in Tucson. Her shoulders ached in the way they did when she'd been doing real work, productive aching, the kind that meant something had been accomplished. She sat in the hotel dining room that Friday evening, eating Vera's stew and thinking about the complaint document and Whitmore and the nail order, and Ruth Whitmore's clear, caring voice saying questions about the project's legitimacy. She was thinking about all of it, organizing it the way she organized a problem on a build site, looking at the elements, understanding the load paths, figuring out where the stress was actually going. Vera refilled her water glass without being asked and sat down across from her. You're thinking hard, Vera said. Whitmore filed a complaint with the county building committee. Vera's expression did something. When? This morning. That's faster than I expected. She folded her hands on the table. He's more worried about you than I thought. About the house. About you. Vera looked at her steadily. You didn't quit when the nail order was held up. You didn't quit when Ruth visited the site. You're still here, still working, and that house is going up. She paused. Men like Whitmore, they expect people to fold. When you don't fold, it makes them angrier. And when they're angrier, they make mistakes. Brenna looked at her. Is that advice? It's an observation, Vera said. The advice is, don't fold. Brenna looked down at her stew. Outside, Red Mesa was settling into its Friday night. The saloons going, horses at the rails, the particular quality of noise that end of week brings to a working town. She thought about 14 towns, 14 jobs she hadn't gotten, the weight of the toolbox, and the weight of other things. Being told no, being told not for you, being looked through and looked past and looked over and told, in every way that didn't use the word, that she didn't belong here, not in this trade, not in this space, not in this world. She'd survived all 14 of those towns. She wasn't going to stop surviving now. Don't fold, she said. Got it. Vera nodded and stood and went back to her kitchen. Brenna finished her stew, went upstairs to her room, sharpened her chisels by lamplight until they could shave the hair off her arm, set her alarm for pre-dawn, and went to sleep. She had a house to build in the morning. The second complaint arrived on a Monday. Brenna found out about it the way she found out about most things in Red Mesa. Not directly, not officially, but through Vera, who heard it from the woman who did laundry for half the town council, who had been in the clerk's office when the paperwork was filed. Another signature on the original complaint, Vera said, setting coffee down in front of Brenna before she'd even asked for it. Harlan Pitch. He owns the feed store. The man who watches me walk past every morning. That's the one. Vera sat down. He's Whitmore's brother-in-law. Married Ruth's younger sister about 15 years ago. Does what he's told. Brenna drank her coffee. Outside the window, Main Street was doing its morning business. Wagons, foot traffic, the blacksmith already going 2 buildings down. How many signatures does the committee need before they issue a suspension? 3, maybe 4,
depending on who's on the committee this quarter. Who's on the committee this quarter?
Vera looked at her. 2 of the 5 are Whitmore men. One's his actual employee, the other owes him money from a bad loan 3 years back. So the math wasn't complicated. Brenna set her cup down. I need to talk to Gideon. He came in for coffee an hour ago, Vera said. He knows. But she found him at the site already working, which was where she always found him, up on the west wall section, driving rafter tails with a rhythm that meant he was angry. She could tell by the spacing of the hammer blows. When Gideon was calm, he worked with a measured pace, steady and considered. When something was eating at him, the rhythm got harder and faster, like the work was the only place the pressure had to go. She climbed up beside him. Vera told me about pitch, she said. Figured she would. He drove another nail. 3rd signature's probably already in the mail. Who's the 3rd? Could be anyone Whitmore's called in a favor from. He paused, holding the hammer. There's a man named Cray who runs the surveying office. Whitmore helped him get the contract 3 years back. And there's Walt Devereaux at the assessors, Whitmore's been on the county board long enough to have his fingerprints on a dozen appointments. Brenna looked out across the build site. The frame stood solid and clean in the morning light. 3 weeks of work, hers and Gideon's together. The roof framing completed, the wall sheathing on 2 sides, the window openings trued and ready for frames. Every piece of it done right, done better than right. If the committee suspends, she said, what happens?
Work stops. Legally, we can't continue until the inquiry is resolved. And the inquiry... He stopped himself. His jaw moved. The inquiry goes as long as Whitmore wants it to go. She was quiet for a moment. A hawk was working the thermals above the far ridge, riding the air in wide, unhurried circles. Is there anything in my work they can actually question? She said. Technically, structurally, no. The complaint said personnel qualifications.
Your work is better than most men I've hired in 20 years. He said it without particular emphasis, like stating the dimensions of a board. That's not what this is about, and everyone knows it. Then we have to make sure everyone keeps knowing it. She picked up her hammer. I want to go to the committee meeting. Gideon looked at her. When's the next one? She said. 2 weeks, probably. They convene the 1st and 3rd Monday of the month. Then we have 2 weeks to put something in front of them that makes the complaint look like what it is. She drove a nail. What I need to know is, are there people in this town who aren't Whitmore's? People who've seen the work, who might say something? Gideon was quiet for a moment. She could feel him thinking, the same way she could feel the weight distribution of a timber before she cut it. Something attentive and careful moving through him. There's Doc Farwell, he finally said. He's been watching the build from the road when he passes, stopped twice to ask questions, good questions, about the foundation system. He's not a Whitmore man. A pause. And there's Abel Marsh. He runs the saddle shop. He and Whitmore had a disagreement about 10 years back over a property line. They don't speak. Could they be persuaded to come to a committee meeting? Marsh, maybe. Farwell. He considered. He's a careful man. He doesn't like getting in the middle of things. Most people don't, Brenna said. Doesn't mean they won't, if the ask is direct enough. Gideon looked at her with that expression she'd started to learn, the one that meant he was reassessing something. You've done this before, he said. It wasn't a question. 14 times, she said. Different towns, different men, same basic story. I've learned a few things about how it works. He went back to his rafter tail. After a moment, she heard the rhythm change. Slightly slower, slightly more deliberate. The anger's still there, but working with it now, not against. By midweek, 3 things happened in quick succession, and not one of them was good. The first was the lumber yard. Brenna had gone in on Wednesday morning to pick up a delivery of window frame stock, white oak, which Gideon had ordered specifically because Eleanor had wanted white oak window frames throughout the house, and Gideon intended to give her that even now. The order was in the ledger. She'd watched the proprietor, a heavy-set man named Fowles, check the ledger himself. He'd found the entry, run his finger down the column, and then she watched the change happen in his face, like a shutter being drawn. Told her the stock hadn't come in yet. It came in Tuesday, she said. I was on the road when the Flagstaff wagon passed me. I saw the yard markings on the load. Fowles looked at his ledger. Must have been a different delivery. The yard marking said Prescott Timber. That's your supplier. A pause. His finger was still on the ledger entry. There's been a mix-up. Mr. Fowles? She kept her voice level. It cost her something. I need that oak. If there's a problem, tell me what it actually is. He looked at her, and in his face she saw what she'd seen in Grubb's face at the hardware store. Not malice exactly. More like a man doing a calculation that he didn't enjoy, where the numbers came out in a direction he'd been told they had to come out. End of the week, he said. She left. The second thing was the formal notice from the county building committee, which arrived by post at the build site, addressed to Gideon, but which he showed her without hesitation. It confirmed an inquiry into project personnel, cited the 2 complaints on record, and indicated a third had been received, pending processing. It did not issue a suspension, not yet, but the language had the feel of a door being held open just long enough to let you know it could close. The third thing happened at the general store. Brenna had gone in to buy nails, not from Grubb, who was still managing his delay, but hardware nails for her own use, a small domestic purchase that had nothing to do with the job site. She was at the counter when she became aware of a conversation behind her that had not stopped when she walked in, but had continued at a slightly elevated volume. 2 women. She recognized one of them, the wife of one of the town council members whose name she'd caught in passing. The other she didn't know. It's the principal of it, the one she recognized was saying. A woman on a construction site, and not even from here. Where is she from? Nobody knows. She just arrived, showed up with a toolbox. Has anyone asked Gideon directly about it? Ruth went out there. He was perfectly rude to her. You know how he is. Brenna paid for her nails. She took her change. The woman behind the counter, young, maybe 20, with a cautious expression, met her eyes for just a moment. Something flickered there. Not sympathy exactly. More like acknowledgement. Brenna nodded at her and walked out. She stood in the street for a moment, nails in her pocket, the sun full and high overhead. The voices from inside were still going. She could still hear them. She started walking back toward the East Road. The thing about being talked about, the thing she'd learned across 14 towns, was that you could not let yourself hear it too clearly. If you heard it too clearly, it got into you. It became part of the weight you carried, and there was only so much weight a person could carry without starting to walk differently. She'd learned to let it be noise, not ignore it. You couldn't afford to ignore it because noise sometimes carried information, but to let it stay noise, to not let it become a voice inside her own head. Her father's voice, she thought, was already in there. That was enough. Debt. She found Abel Marsh in his saddle shop on Thursday afternoon. He was in the back, stitching a repair on a seat, bent over his work in the particular posture of a craftsman who has been at their bench long enough that the posture has become structural. He was a lean, dry man somewhere in his late 50s, with the hands of someone who'd worked leather all his life. He looked up when she knocked on the open door frame. "Help you?" he said. "My name is Brenna Hale. I'm working on the Mercer build." His expression settled into something careful, but not hostile. "I know who you are." She came in without being invited, which was a risk, but she'd found that waiting to be invited into things was a way to spend your whole life waiting. She sat on the stool across from his bench. "I need a character," she said. "Someone who's seen the work, who can tell the committee that what's in front of them isn't a question of qualifications." Marsh kept stitching. His hands moved without him looking at them. "You're asking me to put myself in the middle of something between Mercer and Whitmore. I'm asking you to tell the truth in front of a committee about what you've seen. I've seen the frame going up. I'm not a builder. You're a craftsman. You know the difference between work that's done right and work that isn't." He looked at her now, directly. His eyes were pale gray, the kind that tend to see a lot. "Why come to me? You don't know me. Gideon said you're not Whitmore's." Something moved in Marsh's face, a quick, complicated expression that she couldn't entirely read. "That's accurate. That's all I need." He was quiet for a long moment. The saddle shop smelled of leather and beeswax, and the particular dusty warmth of an enclosed space in afternoon heat. Outside, a horse went past, hooves slow on the packed dirt. "The committee's 2 weeks out," she said. "I'm not asking you to take a side. I'm asking you to show up and say that the work you've seen is sound, because it is. Anyone who's walked past that site can see it. Marsh set down his stitching tool, folded his hands on the bench. He looked like a man doing a different kind of calculation than the one she'd seen in Grub and Fowls. Something that wasn't about power or obligation, but about something more private. My father was a carpenter, he finally said. Built 3 houses in this county before he died, good houses. They're still standing. She waited. He got run out of a job once. Somebody didn't like something about him. He picked his stitching tool back up. I'll come to the meeting. Brenna let out a breath she hadn't fully known she was holding. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. 2 of those committee men are Whitmore's. My saying the work is sound won't automatically mean anything. No, she agreed. But it means something. But she talked to Doc Farwell on Friday evening, catching him as he was leaving his office. He was a tall, careful man, precise in his movements, the kind who considered his words before releasing them. He listened to her while they stood in the street, his black bag in one hand, the evening light making long shadows down the road. He didn't say yes immediately. He said he'd think about it. That's all I'm asking, Brenna said. He looked at her with a steadiness she'd come to associate with people who had learned to read situations quickly, which was, she supposed, what a good doctor did for a living. You're not from here? No? Where are you from? 3 or 4 places, mostly from wherever my father was working. And before Red Mesa, where were you working? I wasn't. She held his gaze. I was burying my father. Then I came here. Something shifted in Farwell's expression. Not pity. She wouldn't have wanted that. More like recalibration. I'll think about it, he said again, but differently this time. Have a good evening, Miss Hale. He walked off down the street. She watched him go, and she didn't know whether he'd show or not, but she'd made the ask, and that was all she could do with it. Och. The following Tuesday, the oak window frame stock arrived at the lumberyard, and Fowles sent a boy to tell her it was ready. She went and collected it herself, loading it onto the handcart with a calmness she had to work to maintain, because what she felt was something between relief and anger. The relief that the material was finally there, the anger that it had been held up in the first place, the particular grinding frustration of knowing that she was spending energy managing obstacles that had nothing to do with the actual work. Back at the site, Gideon helped her unload. He ran his hand along the oak stalk with an expression she couldn't entirely name, something private moving through it. Eleanor would have liked these, he said. He said it quietly, not quite to her, and she let it be. They started on the window frames that afternoon. It was good work, careful, precise work, the kind that required attention. She cut the mortises, he cut the tenons, and they worked with the ease of people who have figured out each other's rhythms, who know when to step in and when to give room. The frames went together cleanly. Gideon held the first one up in the opening of the main room window, and the afternoon light came through it the way light comes through a properly proportioned window, even, unhurried, filling the space with the easy quality that good joinery achieves when all the parts are right. Good fit, he said, measured twice. I know. A pause. You always measure twice. My father taught me. Gideon set the frame down and looked at her. In the filtered light of the unfinished room, with sawdust on his shirt and the quiet of the late afternoon around them, he looked like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and was only just beginning to notice how tired his arms were. What was he like? Gideon said. Your father. She thought about that. Stubborn, quiet, had opinions about everything but mostly kept them to himself except in the workshop, where he had opinions about everything very loudly. She ran her thumb along the frame stock. He believed you could tell everything about a person from how they kept their tools. He thought carelessness was a moral failing. Gideon's mouth did something, almost a smile, not quite. I think that too. I know, she said. I could tell from your toolbox the first day. He looked at the window frame. How long was he sick? About 8 months, really sick. Before that, slower. A year, maybe. She paused. He kept working as long as he could. Stopped about 3 months before the end. That's hard. Yes. She looked at the window opening, at the light coming through. But I was there. I got to be there for all of it. Gideon didn't say anything for a moment. The afternoon settled around them, That particular quiet that comes over a construction site when the day is almost done and the hammers have stopped and the wood is just sitting, patient, in whatever shape you've given it. Eleanor went fast, he said finally. 6 weeks from the diagnosis. I didn't have enough time to understand what was happening before it was over. She didn't try to answer that. Some things didn't have an answer that helped. After a moment, he picked up the window frame again. Let's get this set before we lose the light. Right, she said. They went back to work. So, the third complaint, from Walt Devereaux at the assessor's office, arrived the following Monday, exactly as Gideon had predicted. The committee notice that came with it had a different tone than the first, formal, clipped, with the word suspension appearing in the second paragraph. Not issued yet, but present. A held threat, like a door held open for a draft. Gideon read it at the kitchen table in the cabin that evening, and Brenna sat across from him with her coffee, and they went through it together, the language, the specifics, the places where Whitmore's fingerprints were most visible, the places where the complaint had been carefully worded to look procedural rather than personal. They've been planning this longer than I thought, Gideon said, probably since the first day I walked out here. He set the paper down. The committee meeting is Monday week. I know. Marsh confirmed he'll come? Yes. I haven't heard back from Farwell. She wrapped her hands around her cup. I think he'll come. I'm not sure. Gideon was quiet. He looked at the complaint on the table, and his expression had gone to that compressed, controlled place again. The pressure in a well-built vessel. I want to say something to you, he said. She waited. I should have been clear from the beginning about what this build is, about why I'm doing it, about what Whitmore is actually after. He looked at her directly. You walked into a situation where the fight was already going. You didn't choose that fight. I should have told you more about it before you signed on. You told me it was going to be loud. I told you there'd be opinions. I didn't tell you there'd be legal filings aimed at you personally. Brenna set her cup down. Mr. Mercer, I've been in 14 towns. The legal filing is new in terms of paperwork, but it's not new in terms of what it is. Somebody decides they can make me go away by making my life difficult enough. She held his gaze. It hasn't worked yet. He was quiet for a moment. Why? He said. Why hasn't it worked? Why do you keep going? Most people, after enough of this, he stopped, started again. After enough being told no and held back and pushed out, most people find something else to do. She thought about that. It wasn't a question she'd been asked directly before. Because I'm good at this, she finally said, and because, she paused, because my father was good at this, and he taught me, and the work means something, not because someone told me it should. Because when you put a joint together that's true, and the frame is plumb, and the house is going to stand for 100 years, that means something. That's real. She picked her cup up again. I'm not going to let someone take that from me because they don't like what I look like. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. All right, he said. And then after a pause, my name is Gideon. You've been calling me Mr. Mercer for 3 weeks. She almost smiled. I know. Old habit. It's a formal habit. You're a formal man. I am, he agreed, but not that formal. This time she did smile, and she didn't entirely stop it. All right, Gideon. He nodded once, like that was settled. Then he picked up the complaint and read it again, and they spent another hour going through it line by line, building their answer, methodical and careful, the way they built everything else. On Wednesday of that week, Brenna arrived at the build site to find the words, Leave Now, scratched into the sheathing of the west wall. Deep scratches, done with something metal, a knife maybe, or a nail. Big letters slanted, applied with enough force that the wood had splintered along the edges. She stood in front of it for a while. Then she went to the toolbox, got out her plane, and planed the letters down until they were gone. It took her 40 minutes. When she was done, the wood was smooth, the grain clean and unbroken. She ran her hand across it once, feeling for any remaining roughness, found none. She went back to work. Gideon arrived an hour later. She didn't tell him about the letters. There was nothing to tell. They were gone, they weren't structural, and telling him would only add to the weight he was already carrying. But that evening, as they were packing up, He stopped at the west wall and ran his hand over the spot where the letters had been, the way she'd run her hand over it. He was quiet. "How deep?" he said. "Surface only." He kept his hand on the wall. "You planed it?" "Yes." He didn't say anything else. He nodded once, the same short, definite nod she'd come to recognize as his version of more than he was saying. He picked up his toolbox. They walked toward the cabin, and neither of them mentioned it again, and the unfinished house stood in the late light behind them, solid on its stone foundation, its frame clean and true and exactly as plumb as they'd built it. Whatever had been scratched into it was gone. What they'd built was still there. The committee meeting was set for Monday at 2 in the afternoon in the county building on the north end of Main Street, a squat sandstone structure that had served as a jail, a post office, and a surveying office at various points in its history, and still smelled faintly of all three. Brenna and Gideon arrived 20 minutes early. Marsh was already there, standing outside with his hat in his hands, looking like a man who had made a decision and intended to stand by it but wasn't enjoying the process. Farwell arrived 2 minutes later, black bag in hand out of apparent habit, nodding once at Brenna with the expression of a man who had thought it over and arrived at a conclusion. She had not expected him. She was honest with herself about that. "Dr. Farwell," she said. "Miss Hale." He looked at the building. "Let's get this done." The committee room was a long rectangle with a table at one end and rows of chairs facing it. 5 men sat at the table. She knew 2 of them, Cray from the surveying office, Devereaux from the assessors. The other 3 she'd seen around town without knowing their names. One of them had a Whitmore quality to his expression, the particular look of a man who already knows how things are going to go. Silas Whitmore himself was not at the committee table. He was sitting in the front row of chairs to the side, as if he'd arrived merely as an interested party. He was a thick man, late 50s, with the well-fed solidity of someone whose comfort had never seriously been threatened. He wore a good suit. His hands were folded on his knee with the patience of someone who had arranged things in advance. His wife Ruth was beside him. She sat very straight. Brenna looked at them both once, then looked away. She sat beside Gideon. Marsh and Farwell sat in the row behind them. The committee chairman, a dry, businesslike man named Hollis, who seemed to regard the whole proceeding with the weary competence of someone managing an inevitable mess, opened the session, read the complaint language into the record, and invited the filed parties to speak. Devereaux spoke first. He cited the 3 complaints in order, summarized the personnel inquiry, and used the phrase community standards 4 times in 6 minutes. Cray added something about permit compliance that was technically accurate but entirely beside the point. Neither of them looked at Brenna directly while they spoke, which told her everything about how certain they were of their position. Then Hollis looked at Gideon. "Mr. Mercer, you want to respond?" Gideon stood. He was not a man built for speeches, and he didn't try to make one. He spoke for about 4 minutes, in the flat, factual way he did everything, laying out the permit history, the material orders, the timeline of construction. He described Brenna's work with the same plainness he'd bring to describing a well-made joint, not with enthusiasm, but with precision, which was more convincing. "The complaint questions personnel qualifications," he said near the end. "I'll say directly. In 20 years of building, I've had 2 carpenters who worked at the level Brenna Hale works at. One of them is dead. The other retired to New Mexico." He looked at the committee. "The complaint has nothing to do with qualifications. Everyone in this room who's been paying attention knows that." He sat down. Hollis looked mildly uncomfortable, which Brenna read as a good sign. Men who had already decided didn't look uncomfortable. "Anyone else?" Marsh stood up. He held his hat, turned it once in his hands, and then set it on his knee and looked at the committee with the directness of a man who was not accustomed to public speaking, but was not intimidated by it either. He said he'd walked past the Mercer build site twice a week for the past month. He said he was not a builder, but he was a craftsman, and he knew the difference between work done right and work done fast, and what he'd seen at the Mercer site was work done right. He said he had no stake in the outcome and no opinion about anyone's domestic arrangements, and he sat back down. Farwell stood next. He spoke about the foundation work, the framing precision, the window placement. He used words like structural integrity and load transfer in a way that suggested he'd spent some time at the site doing more than passing on the road. He said the project was being conducted to a standard that reflected well on the county and poorly on anyone who wanted to stop it for reasons that had nothing to do with safety or legitimacy. He sat down. The room was quiet for a moment. Then Silas Whitmore cleared his throat. He didn't stand. He addressed Hollis from his chair, which was itself a statement, the ease of a man who doesn't need to perform effort. "I appreciate the testimonials," he said, in a voice that managed to sound like it was appreciating nothing. "But the committee's concern is procedural. The question isn't whether the carpentry is adequate. The question is whether this project has the proper standing to proceed." Hollis looked at him. "The permits are current, Mr. Whitmore." "The permits, yes." Whitmore unfolded his hands, a deliberate movement, and reached into his jacket. He produced a document, folded, legal-sized, the kind that arrives from lawyers' offices. "What I'm raising now is a different matter, a matter I believe the committee needs to consider before this project goes any further." He handed the document to the nearest committee member, who passed it to Hollis. Hollis unfolded it, read it. His expression changed. Brenna watched Gideon's hands. They were flat on his knees, very still. "This is a property claim," Hollis said. "A title dispute," Whitmore said, "specifically regarding the transfer of the land parcel on which the Mercer construction is situated. My attorney has reviewed the original deed transfer following the death of Eleanor Mercer 2 years ago, and there are questions, significant questions, about whether that transfer was executed correctly, whether in fact the property was legally conveyed to Gideon Mercer in a form that gives him the right to build on it." The room had gone very still. Brenna looked at Gideon. He was staring at the document in Hollis's hands. His face had gone to somewhere she hadn't seen it go before. Not angry, not compressed, but something rawer than that. Like something had been reached in without warning. "That land was Eleanor's before we were married," Gideon said. His voice was quiet. "The deed was in both our names for 11 years. "The deed was in both names during the marriage, yes," Whitmore said, with the patience of a man who had rehearsed this. "But at Eleanor's passing, the question of proper conveyance to the surviving spouse, the legal mechanism by which it transferred to you solely, that mechanism may not have been executed. My attorney has found what he believes to be an irregularity in the probate records." "There was no irregularity." "That will be for the committee and ultimately the county court to determine." Whitmore refolded his hands. "In the meantime, I believe it would be appropriate to suspend construction pending resolution of the title question." The man at the end of the committee table, the one with the Whitmore look, was already nodding. Hollis looked at Gideon. "Do you have your probate documentation?" "Not on me, it's—" He stopped. "It's at the county clerk's office. It was filed 2 years ago. Do you have a copy?" A pause. A long one. Brenna watched Gideon's face, and she understood, in that pause, what he was working through. The probate filing. 2 years ago, 6 weeks after Eleanor died, when he'd been in no condition to be systematic about paperwork, when he'd been handling things in the fog of early grief. She'd heard what that period had been like from Vera. The stopped construction, the closed cabin door, the weeks when people had wondered if he was all right in there. "I'll find the documentation," Gideon said. His voice was controlled. "But I know that title transferred correctly. I was there. I filed the paperwork myself." "Then finding the documentation should be simple," Whitmore said. Hollis set the claim document down on the table. He rubbed his face with one hand, a gesture that suggested he wished he were somewhere else, doing something less complicated. "We'll table the personnel inquiry for now. The title question needs to be addressed first." He looked at Gideon. "I need you to produce your probate documentation within 10 days. If there's a legitimate title dispute, we'll need to involve the county court." A pause. "In the meantime, out of an abundance of caution—" "No," Brenna said. Every head in the room turned toward her. She was on her feet. She hadn't consciously decided to stand. She was standing, and now she was speaking, and she was going to finish what she'd started. "With respect, Mr. Hollis," she said, "there is no legitimate title dispute. What there is a man who wants this project stopped using any available mechanism, and when the personnel complaint didn't work, this is the next mechanism." She looked at the committee directly. Not at the 2 Whitmore men, but at the 3 in the middle, the ones whose faces suggested they were still deciding. The documentation exists. It's in the county records. You can verify that without suspending construction. Give Mr. Mercer his 10 days to produce the paperwork, but let work continue while he does. If the title is clear, and it is, you've lost nothing. If you suspend now and the title turns out to be clear, you've handed a 3-week delay to a man who never had a legitimate complaint.
The room was quiet. Hollis looked at her for a long moment. Then he looked at the 3 uncommitted committee members. Then he looked at the document in front of him. "Work continues," he said finally. 10 days, Mr. Mercer. I need the documentation on my desk." Whitmore's expression, when Brenna looked at him, was not angry. It was something more dangerous than angry. It was the expression of a man recalculating.
Ruth Whitmore was looking at Brenna with something that might, in different circumstances, have been recognition. Gideon didn't say much on the walk back to the site. She didn't push him. She could see what was happening. The way the committee room had reopened something. The way Whitmore had reached into the middle of the grief and used it as a weapon. It was a particular kind of cruelty that required no blade because the wound was already there. At the site, he went straight to work. Not the fast, angry rhythm she'd heard before, but something slower and more deliberate, almost mechanical, the kind of working that wasn't about the work. She gave him an hour. Then she came and sat on a sawhorse near where he was working the porch floorboards and said, "Tell me about the probate filing." He kept working. "I filed it with the county clerk, April 2 years ago." "You have a copy?" "There should be one in the cabin, in the document box." A pause. "I haven't opened that box since I filed it." She understood why. "Is there anything in the original deed that could give Whitmore's claim any substance? Any ambiguity in how the land was titled?" He was quiet for a while. "The original deed was in Eleanor's name alone. She inherited it from her father. When we married, we had it retitled in both names. That was 1881. When she died, the probate should have transferred the full title to me as surviving spouse. That's standard." "Should have." "Did." He set down his hammer. I wasn't careful about everything in those weeks, but I was careful about the land. I knew it mattered." He looked at the property around them. The cottonwoods, the rock formations, the site Eleanor had chosen in 2 minutes because she liked the afternoon light. "I made sure it was done right. Then we find the documentation." She stood. "Tonight, if you can. Go through the document box, find the probate filing, and I'll go to the clerk's office tomorrow morning before we start work." He looked at her. "Why?" "Because the county clerk keeps copies of everything. If there's a record discrepancy, I want to know about it before Whitmore's attorney finds it. And if there isn't one, if the record is clean, I want a certified copy from the clerk that says so." Gideon was quiet for a moment. "You've done this before too," he said. "Different situation, but similar principle." She picked up her tools. "Fix the thing. Don't manage around it." He looked at her. That steady, assessing look she knew by now. "I'll go through the box tonight." The document box was at the back of the cabin's small shelf unit, behind 2 years of dust and some books and a coffee tin that had been repurposed as a container for spare bolts. Gideon found the probate filing where he'd put it, in an envelope, folded with the county clerk's stamp in the corner. He found the retitling deed from 1881. He found the original deed in Eleanor's name, transferring from her father's estate in 1879. He sat at the cabin table with all of it spread out, reading each document with the careful attention he'd given the complaint papers, and what he found was that the chain of title was complete and clean and legitimate, every transfer properly recorded, the probate filing executed correctly in April of the year Eleanor died. He sat with that for a while. Outside, the night was quiet, just the sound of wind in the cottonwoods. He hadn't opened that box in 2 years. He'd known, roughly, what was in it, the documents, some letters, a few other things he'd put there and not wanted to look at. He'd dealt with it at the time because it needed to be dealt with, and then he'd put it away and not gone back. At the bottom of the box, under everything else, was a folded piece of paper that wasn't a legal document. He recognized Eleanor's handwriting from across the table before he even reached for it. He didn't unfold it. He set his hand on it for a moment. Let it be there. Then he put everything back in the box in order, with the probate filing and the deed copies on top, and went to bed. The clerk's office opened at 8. Brenna was there at 5 past, with the probate filing from Gideon's document box in her hand, and she requested a certified copy of the county's own record. The clerk, a young man, methodical, with the look of someone who took his record-keeping seriously, went to the files. He was gone for about 10 minutes. When he came back, he had a ledger open. "The probate filing is here," he said. "April 14th, 2 years back. Transfer to sole ownership, Gideon William Mercer." He looked up. "But there's a notation." Brenna went still. "What kind of notation?" "An amendment request, filed 6 weeks ago." He turned the ledger so she could see it. "Requesting review of the transfer on grounds of irregular execution, filed by..." He read the name, Silas Whitmore. So he'd been planning this since before she arrived. 6 weeks ago, she hadn't even been in Red Mesa yet. He'd been building toward this the entire time, the complaints and the material delays all running parallel to the legal strategy, layer after layer, designed to produce exactly the moment in that committee room. "Can I see the specific irregularity cited?" she said. The clerk found the amendment request. She read it. The claimed irregularity was technical, a question about the notarization of the probate filing, specifically whether the notary who had witnessed Gideon's signature was properly licensed in the county at the time of filing. She read that twice. Then she looked at the original filing date, April 14th. Then she looked at the notary name, Thomas Briggs. "I need the notary registry," she said, "for this county, 2 years back." The clerk looked at her steadily. He was young, but he wasn't slow. "You think the irregularity claim is wrong?" "I think it might be. Can you check?" He went back to the files. This time he was gone longer. 12 minutes, maybe 15. She stood at the counter and waited, and she was very careful not to let what she felt show on her face, because what she felt was a particular kind of focused, cold clarity that came over her sometimes when she was working on a difficult problem, where everything that wasn't the problem got very quiet. The clerk came back with a bound registry. He opened it, ran his finger down a column, and stopped. "Thomas Briggs. Notary commission issued March of that year. Renewed the following September." He looked up. He was licensed. "Can I get a certified copy of that entry?" "Give me 20 minutes." She had the certified copies of both the probate record and the notary registry entry in her hand by 9 o'clock. She walked to the site in long strides, the documents in her bag, and found Gideon already at work on the porch floor. She sat down on the steps and spread both documents on the boards beside her. "Whitmore's claim is about the notarization," she said. "He's arguing the notary wasn't properly licensed, but the registry shows he was." She tapped the certified copy. "This is the county's own record. Whitmore's attorney either didn't find this or is hoping the committee doesn't." Gideon looked at the documents. His expression did something careful and complicated. "If the committee sees this, the claim falls apart. There's no irregularity. The title is clean." She looked at him. "But Whitmore's attorney is good enough to know this registry exists, which means if he's still pressing the claim, he's betting that the committee is his, and the registry won't matter." Gideon was quiet. He was looking at the documents, and she could see him thinking, working through it the way he worked through a structural problem, following the load paths, finding where the stress was going. "The county court," he said. "Yes. If this goes to court, the registry record wins, but that takes months, and Whitmore knows that. He doesn't need to win in court. He just needs to delay long enough." Gideon picked up the certified copy. "The committee gave me 10 days. If I bring this to Hollis before the 10 days are up..." "The day after tomorrow," Brenna said. "Don't wait. Go to Hollis directly, not at a committee session. Show him the registry certification. Give him the clean title chain." She paused. "And there's one more thing." Gideon looked at her. "Whitmore's attorney filed the amendment request 6 weeks ago. That's a documented date. I arrived in Red Mesa 5 weeks ago." She held his gaze. "The legal strategy started before I got here. This was never about my qualifications. Whitmore was already moving against the land. I just gave him an additional lever." Something shifted in Gideon's face, a recognition, and under it, something that looked like anger of a different quality than the hammer rhythm kind, quieter, deeper. "He was going to come after the property regardless," Gideon said. "Yes. The personnel complaint was a distraction, something to make noise while the real move was developing underneath." She folded the documents back into her bag. which means the real fight was never about me. That doesn't make what they did to you. I know. She cut him off, not harshly. I know it doesn't, but it changes the strategy. If this is about the land, we fight it on the land question. The personnel complaint dies on its own once the committee sees that Whitmore's been running a coordinated campaign. Gideon stood. He looked at the house, at the white oak window frames they'd fitted last week, now set and trimmed, bright against the rough-sheathed walls. At the porch floor they'd been laying this week, tight boards, no gaps. I'll go to Hollis tomorrow morning, he said. Go today, Brenna said, before Whitmore has any more time. He looked at her, then he nodded. The short, definite nod. Today? He left for town. She picked up his hammer and went back to the porch floor. She was fitting the last run of porch boards when she heard a horse on the road, moving fast. She didn't look up immediately. She was in the middle of a nail line and she wanted to finish it. When she did look up, it was a rider she didn't recognize, pulling up at the edge of the property. Mercer here? The man called down. Gone to town. You the woman Carpenter? I am. He reached into his jacket and produced an envelope. For Mercer, from Whitmore's attorney. He held it out. She stood up and walked to the horse, and the rider handed it down, and she looked at the envelope without opening it, and the rider turned his horse and rode back toward town without another word. She set the envelope on Gideon's toolbox. Then she went back to the porch floor because there were 6 more boards to fit, and they weren't going to fit themselves, and she was not going to let Silas Whitmore's lawyer's envelope sit in the middle of her afternoon and change the quality of her work. When Gideon came back 2 hours later, he found her finishing the last nail line on the porch floor, and he found the envelope on his toolbox, and he read what was inside it, and he stood very still for a long moment. He's going to court, Gideon said. She looked up. Filed this morning. Title dispute, county court, official process. He folded the letter. His voice was level. That controlled, compressed level that she now understood was not absence of feeling, but containment of it. Hollis was sympathetic. He agreed the title documentation is clean, but if it's in the county court, he can't just dismiss the committee complaint. He has to wait for the court resolution. How long? Weeks, maybe 2 months. She was quiet. And there's a witness, Gideon said. The attorney's filing lists a witness who claims to have knowledge of an irregularity in the original deed transfer from Eleanor's father's estate. Someone who was present at the original filing in 1879. He looked at her. If that witness testifies, who is it? A man named Corbin. He was the clerk in the land office when Eleanor's father filed the deed. He's retired, lives over in Haverstock County. She stood up, brushed sawdust off her knees. What kind of knowledge could he have? I don't know. Eleanor's father's estate was complicated. He died without a formal will, and the land transfer was handled by the probate court. If there was any ambiguity in that original transfer in 1879, and Corbin knows about it, he stopped. It could unravel the whole chain. She looked at him directly. Then you need to talk to Corbin before Whitmore's attorney does. Gideon looked at her. Haverstock County is 2 days' ride. I know. A long pause. She watched him working through it. The 2 days away from the build, the timeline, the risk of leaving the site, leaving the project, leaving her here alone with whatever Whitmore might do while he was gone. I'll be here, she said. The build doesn't stop. Brenna, Gideon. She met his eyes. Go find Corbin. I'll keep the work going. Nobody is going to come on this property and touch what we've built. He studied her for a moment. That long, assessing look. She held it. I'll leave in the morning, he said. Leave tonight, she said. Get a head start on the dark. He looked at the house, the porch floor she'd just finished, the white oak window frames, the roof line clean and straight against the evening sky. Then he went into the cabin to pack. She stood on the porch she'd built, and the cottonwoods moved in the evening air, and the light was that exact quality Eleanor Mercer had liked, the reason she'd chosen this piece of ground over 5 others. Brenna thought, I'm not going to let them take this. Not the land, not the house, not the work, not any of it. He rode out at dusk, the light going flat and orange behind the western rocks, and Brenna stood at the edge of the property and watched until the dust from his horse settled back onto the road and there was nothing left to watch. Then she went inside the cabin, made coffee, and sat at the table with a piece of paper and a pencil and wrote out everything that needed to be done on the build over the next 4 days. She treated it like a materials list, methodical, column by column. What was structural and couldn't wait? What was finish work and could be sequenced around it? What required 2 people and what she could manage alone? Most of it she could manage alone. She'd been managing alone longer than she'd been managing anything else. She went to bed early and woke before the sky started to lighten, and she was at the build site with her lantern while the stars were still out. Yep. The first day without Gideon was the easiest, because she spent it on work she knew well. Interior wall framing on the ground floor, the kind of methodical, physical work that didn't require a second set of hands so much as a second set of eyes. And she was her own second set of eyes. She set the stud layout, cut to length, nailed off the plates. The work was satisfying in the direct, uncomplicated way that good framing always was. You put a thing in the right place, and it stayed there. By midday, she'd framed 2 interior walls and started on the 3rd. Nobody came by. No riders, no visitors from town, no envelopes delivered by unfamiliar men on horseback. The road was quiet. The cottonwoods moved in the midday wind. A hawk worked the thermals above the south ridge. The same hawk, or one just like it, riding the air with the patience of something that understood waiting. She ate lunch sitting on the porch steps she'd built, with her back against the doorframe, looking at the cottonwoods the way she imagined Eleanor Mercer must have looked at them. She thought about what it meant that a woman she had never met had chosen this ground for the quality of its afternoon light, and that the man who had loved her was spending his grief building the house she never got to live in, and that Brenna had walked into the middle of all that with a dead man's toolbox and no particular plan except to work. She thought there was something in that she couldn't fully name yet, but that she was beginning to feel the shape of. She went back to work. The second day, Vera came. Brenna heard the wagon on the road mid-morning and looked up from the window trim she was cutting to see Vera Suggs pulling a small wagon with a canvas-covered load in the back. Vera was not a woman who did anything by half measures. When she decided to show up somewhere, she showed up with provisions. "I brought lunch and dinner," Vera said, climbing down. "And before you say anything, I'm not here because I think you can't feed yourself. I'm here because I want to see the house." Brenna looked at her. "All right." Vera walked around the outside first, taking her time, looking at the foundation, the wall framing, the window trim, the porch. She had the look of a woman who was seeing something she'd been thinking about for a while. She stopped at the porch floor and ran her hand along the boards. "You fit these?" she said. "Yesterday." "They're tight. They should be." Brenna came and stood beside her. "Porch floor works hard, gets wet, gets dry, gets walked on. You leave gaps, you'll have rot inside 5 years." Vera straightened and looked at the house as a whole. The frame, the roof line, the white oak window frames catching the morning light. Something moved in her expression that Brenna hadn't seen on her before. Something quieter than the usual Vera. "It's going to be a real house," Vera said. "That's the plan. I mean, I knew that. I've known Gideon was building it, but seeing it like this..." She stopped. Eleanor would have loved it. "I think she picked the site," Brenna said. "Gideon told me." She did. Vera was quiet for a moment. She was a particular person, knew what she wanted and wasn't embarrassed about it. A pause. Gideon was the same. They were well matched in that way. Brenna looked at the window frames. "He told me she had 8 months, that it went fast at the end. 6 weeks from the diagnosis. She was gone before he'd figured out how to be afraid." Vera shook her head slightly. "He closed down completely after. Didn't speak to most people for the better part of a year. I left food on his doorstep twice a week and didn't ask anything of him." She looked at Brenna. "He started talking again around the time he started building again." "Building was how he came back," Brenna said. "The build is how he came back," Vera said. "And then you showed up and..." She stopped herself, reconsidered whatever she'd been about to say, and replaced it with, "You want coffee with this lunch?" "Always," Brenna said. They ate on the porch steps. Vera's biscuits, cold ham, dried apple. And Vera talked about Red Mesa in the way she always did, with the particular mix of affection and exasperation of someone who had chosen to stay in a place fully understanding its faults. She talked about who in town had been asking questions about the build since the committee meeting. More people than Brenna would have expected. Not just the Martian Farwell contingent, but people who had been quiet before, who seemed to be recalibrating. Harlan Pitch came into the dining room 2 nights ago, Vera said. Ruth's brother-in-law, the one who signed the complaint. Brina looked at her. He sat in the corner and ate his dinner and didn't say much, but before he left, he told me. Vera paused. He said he wasn't sure the complaint had been the right thing. Brina absorbed that. Did he say why? Said he'd walked past the build site last week, said it looked like serious work. Vera dusted biscuit crumbs off her lap. I think what he meant was, it was easier to sign a piece of paper about a woman carpenter when she was abstract. Harder when the house is right there and anyone can see it's being built properly. Is that going to change what he does? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Or maybe it means there are more cracks in Whitmore's wall than there were 2 weeks ago. She stood, picking up the basket. Either way, I thought you should know. Brenna walked her to the wagon. Vera loaded the basket, climbed up, gathered the reins. How are you really? Vera said, looking at her directly. Not the casual question it sometimes is. Brenna thought about it. Tired, she said honestly, but not the kind of tired that makes you want to stop. Vera nodded, like that was an answer she recognized. Keep going then. She clicked the horse and drove back toward town, and Brenna stood at the road's edge and watched the wagon go with a feeling she couldn't entirely categorize, but that had something warm in it. Then she went back to work. On the 3rd day, she started on the stair treads. It was the most demanding solo work of the 4 days, not physically, but dimensionally. The stair treads needed to be consistent within a 1/16 of an inch across the full run, or you'd get a rhythm problem walking them, that stumble and catch that came from uneven risers. She'd seen stairs like that in poorly built houses. She would not have them in this one. She worked slowly, measured each tread blank 3 times before cutting, checked the riser layout with a story pole her father had taught her to make. A simple stick with all the riser heights marked on it. The whole stair run visible at once, so you could see discrepancies across the full layout rather than just between adjacent steps. She was fitting the 4th tread when she heard a voice. Miss Hale? She looked up from the staircase. A woman was standing in the doorway of the main room. Not Vera, not anyone she'd expected. She recognized her after a moment. The young woman from the general store counter. The one who'd met her eyes the day the 2 women had been talking. I'm sorry to come in, the woman said. She was holding something, a cloth-wrapped parcel. The door was open. It's all right. Brenna came down from the stair landing. Can I help you? My name is Clara Sims. My husband he works for Mr. Whitmore at the bank. She said it with the particular caution of someone navigating ice. I want you to know I don't... She stopped, tried again. I saw what they wrote on your wall. I don't think that's right. Brenna looked at her. The scratches she'd planed off. She'd thought no one had seen them except Gideon. Who told you about that? My husband mentioned it. He heard it from someone at the bank. Clara's jaw was slightly set. The look of a woman who had made a decision that felt necessary and uncomfortable in equal measure. He used the word effective. The word sat in the air between them with its full weight. I brought you this, Clara said, holding out the parcel. I bake most mornings. It's not much. Brenna took it. It was warm, bread from the feel of it. Thank you. I can't do much, Clara said. My husband and the job and... She stopped. Her eyes went around the room. The framed walls, the stair landing, the light coming through the white oak window frames. It's a beautiful house. It will be, Brenna said. It's not finished yet. No. Clara looked at it. But you can see what it's going to be. She looked at Brenna. I just wanted you to know, not everyone in this town is... She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I know, Brenna said. Thank you for coming. Clara nodded and left, moving quickly, like someone who had done the thing they came to do and wasn't going to spend more time on it than necessary. Brenna stood in the half-finished main room with the warm parcel in her hands and looked at the window frames and the light coming through them. She ate the bread for lunch. It was good bread, carefully made, the crust cracked just right, She went back to her stair treads. Gideon came back late on the fourth evening, riding in from the road at the kind of pace that meant something. She was still at the site, working later than usual by lantern light on the stair trim, when she heard the horse. He came around the cottonwoods and dismounted in one motion, and she could see from 20 feet away that something had happened. Something in the quality of how he was moving, a different kind of tension than the compressed anger she knew. Something that had more energy in it. Not quite relief, but the precondition of it. "I found Corbin," he said. She set down her tools. "And?" He tied the horse to the rail and came up onto the porch and sat on the steps, still in his trail coat, and she sat beside him and waited. "He's 81 years old," Gideon said. "Lives with his daughter in Haverstock. Sharp as a tack. His memory is completely clear." He reached into his coat and produced an envelope, thicker than the one Whitmore's attorney had sent. He remembered the deed transfer from 1879, Eleanor's father's estate. Said it was the cleanest transfer he'd processed in 2 years of working that office. No irregularities, no ambiguities. Everything executed correctly. Did he say that in writing? He said it in writing, signed it in front of his daughter and a neighbor who agreed to witness, and gave me the original notarized statement. Gideon held up the envelope. He also said... He stopped. His jaw moved. He said someone had come to see him 3 weeks ago. A man from a law office in the territory asked him about the 1879 filing. Corbin told him the same thing. No irregularities. The man went away. A pause. Whitmore's attorney already knew the record was clean. He filed the court claim anyway. Brenna was quiet for a moment, absorbing the full shape of it. The deliberateness, the calculated bad faith. Whitmore had built an attack he knew was baseless, because the attack didn't need to win. It just needed to run long enough. He never intended to win in court, she said. No. Just long enough to kill the build schedule. Long enough to... Gideon stopped. She watched something work through his face, something that moved through the anger and came out the other side of it, raw and tired. I've been building this house for 3 years, stopping, starting, fighting the weather and the materials, and my own... He didn't finish that. And now a man who wants my land uses my wife's estate as a weapon. She didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say that would help with that. After a while, he said, "The stair treads." She looked at him. He was looking through the open door at the staircase. "You finished the treads, and the risers, and the trim on the first 4 steps." He got up and went inside, and she followed him, and he crouched at the base of the stairs and ran his hand along the first tread, the way he ran his hand along everything he was assessing. Attentive, thorough, feeling for what the eye might miss. Consistent, he said, within a 16th. Better than that. He stood. His hand was still on the newel post, a rough post, still waiting for finish work, but solid. "You built all of this." 4 days. "Alone." "I've been alone before." She paused. "Clara Sims came by." He turned. "The bank teller's wife?" "She brought bread." Brenna paused. "She wanted me to know not everyone in town thought the wall scratching was right." Gideon's expression did something. Surprise, and then something more complicated underneath it. "Her husband works for Whitmore." "I know. She came anyway." He looked at the stairs again, then at the walls around them, the framed interior, the window frames, the porch floor visible through the doorway. In the lamplight, the house had a quality it didn't have in daylight, softer, closer, the rough materials less visible and the proportions more so. You could see, in that light, what it was going to be. "I'm going to Hollis tomorrow morning," Gideon said. With Corbin's statement and the notary registry certification, the court filing was based on a claim Whitmore's attorney already knew was false. He looked at her. "That's not just a failed claim. That's abuse of process." "Will Hollis act on that?" "I don't know. But the documentation is clean and Corbin's statement is clear, and if Hollis presents it to the court, the judge is going to have questions for Whitmore's attorney about why a case was filed that the attorney already knew was baseless." He paused. "That's a different conversation than a title dispute." Brenna thought about Whitmore sitting in the front row at the committee meeting, hands folded, patient, the expression of a man who had arranged things. She thought about the scratched letters she'd planned off the wall. She thought about Grubb looking at the wall behind her when she'd asked about the nail order, and Fowles and the oak lumber, and all the small deliberate friction of the past month. "When you go to Hollis," she said, "I want to come." Gideon looked at her. "This isn't just about the land anymore," she said. "It hasn't been just about the land since the first complaint. They went after me personally, and I've been staying in my lane, working, not pushing back publicly because I didn't want to make it harder for you." She held his gaze. "But if this is ending, I want to be in the room when it ends." He was quiet for a moment. "You've been staying in your lane," he repeated, and there was something in how he said it. Not quite disbelief, but something adjacent, like he'd been watching the lane she'd stayed in and had a different view of how narrow it was. "Relatively," she said. He almost smiled. "All right, you come, Bob." Hollis listened without interrupting. He had a quality she'd noticed at the committee meeting. Beneath the weariness, an actual fairness, the fairness of a man who didn't enjoy being used. He read Corbin's statement twice. He looked at the notary certification. He went through the full title chain one document at a time, and when he was done, he set everything on his desk and pressed his palms flat on the surface. "The court filing cites a specific irregularity," he said. "That irregularity does not exist. Corbin's statement confirms it does not exist. The attorney who filed the claim had already spoken with Corbin and received the same information 3 weeks prior to filing." He paused. "That's a problem for the attorney, and for whoever instructed him." Gideon said nothing. Brenna said nothing. They let that sit. "I can't dismiss the court filing myself," Hollis said. "That goes through the judge. But I can file an administrative complaint about the process, and I can communicate to the committee that the title dispute is based on documentation that has now been comprehensively refuted." He looked at both of them. The committee complaint, the personnel inquiry, was subordinate to the title dispute. If the title dispute collapses, the committee complaint has nothing left to stand on. "Will the committee close it?" Brenna said. Hollis looked at her. "The committee has 5 members. 2 of them," he chose his next words carefully, "2 of them may require additional persuasion, but 3 of them have been watching this situation for 2 weeks, and I think 3 of them have formed opinions about what's been happening here." He picked up Corbin's statement. "When I present them with this, I believe the vote will go the way it should go." He showed them out with a handshake that was more than procedural. On the steps of the county building, in the morning sun, Brenna and Gideon stood for a moment without speaking. "It's not over," Gideon said. "No, but it's different than it was yesterday." He nodded, started toward his horse. "Gideon," she said. He stopped. She didn't know exactly what she wanted to say. She stood in the street with the sun on her face and thought about 4 days alone on the build site and the warm parcel from Clara Sims and the stair tread she'd cut within a 1/16 of an inch and the scratched letters she'd planed to nothing and the long walk she'd been walking for 2 years through 14 towns with a dead man's toolbox. "The house is going to be done," she said. "I want you to know that. Whatever else happens, the house is going to be done." Gideon looked at her for a long moment. The sun was getting high. Down the street, Red Mesa was doing its morning business. Wagons, foot traffic, the sound of the blacksmith, the ordinary, continuous noise of a working town going about its work. "I know," he said. "I've known it for a while." He mounted up. She started walking back toward the East Road. The committee met 6 days later. All 5 members attended. Hollis presented Corbin's statement, the notary certification, the full title chain, and his administrative assessment of the court filing. He spoke for 20 minutes without interruption. When he was done, one of the middle 3 committee members, a man named Porter, who ran the feed mill and had sat through both previous meetings with the careful blankness of someone withholding judgment, asked to see the Corbin statement again, read it, and handed it back. "I move to close the personnel inquiry," Porter said. The vote was 4-1. The 2 Whitmore men split. Cray voted to close. Devereaux voted against, but he was alone, and alone he didn't count for much. The work suspension was lifted. The committee complaint was formally closed. Brenna was not in the room for the vote. She was at the build site, fitting the stair trim, because the stair trim needed fitting and someone needed to be there doing it. She found out from Marsh, who came out to the site that afternoon looking like a man who had witnessed something satisfying and wanted to report it accurately. 4-1, Marsh said. "Cray voted with us." Don't know what moved him, but he did. Brenna set down her trimming chisel. She was quiet for a moment. Thank you, she said, for coming to the meetings. Marsh turned his hat in his hands, the same gesture as the first committee meeting, the habitual movement of a man in a public setting he hadn't entirely chosen. My father would have wanted someone to do the same for him, he said, and that was all he said about it, and he went back to town. She stood in the half-finished house, in the afternoon light coming through the white oak window frames, and she put her hands flat on the stair rail, rough wood, waiting for sanding and finish, and she let herself feel, for just a moment, the full weight of what had been held back and was now released. It wasn't triumph. It was something quieter than that. More like the feeling after you've driven the last nail in a frame that's been fighting you, and you step back and it's plumb, and it's right, and it's going to hold. She picked up her chisel and went back to the trim. Whitmore's court filing was withdrawn 11 days later, 2 days before the scheduled hearing. No statement was issued. The attorney's name appeared in no further documents related to the Mercer property. Gideon told her about it that evening while they were finishing up. He told her the way he told her most things, but directly, without embellishment. It's done, he said. The land is clear, she said. The land was always clear. He said it with a flatness that was not quite bitterness, but carried some of its weight. But now everyone knows it's clear. She understood the difference. She understood it well. They put their tools away in the last light and walked across the porch she'd built. And Gideon stopped and looked out at the cottonwoods, and she stopped beside him, and the light through the leaves was that particular silver gold of late afternoon that Eleanor Mercer had driven out to see and said, "This one." It was good light. Brenna understood exactly why Eleanor had chosen it. "Tomorrow we start on the interior walls," Gideon said. "The bedroom partition on the second floor," she said. "Then the kitchen framing." That order, yes. They stood for a moment more. The light moved in the cottonwoods. Below the sound of the wind, the property was very quiet. "Good work this week," Gideon said. "It was a good week's work," she agreed. She picked up her toolbox and started down the east road toward town, and the house stood behind her, solid on its stone foundation, its frame clean and true, its white oak window frames catching the last of the day. The interior work was different from the framing. Framing was structural, all force and precision, every joint carrying load, every measurement answerable to physics. Interior work was something else. It was the part of building where you stopped fighting the materials and started listening to them, where the house told you what it wanted to be. Brenna had always preferred the framing. She was honest with herself about that. The framing was where you could prove something, where the work either held or it didn't, where there was no ambiguity about whether you'd done it right. Interior work required a different kind of patience. It required you to slow down enough to care about things that didn't carry load. She was learning to care about them. The bedroom partition on the second floor went up in 2 days. Straight, solid, the door opening centered exactly as Gideon had drawn it. The kitchen framing followed, more complex because of the chimney chase integration, which required them to work around the existing stone flue in a way that kept the framing clean without fighting the masonry. They solved it together, standing in the kitchen space for the better part of a morning, arguing quietly and specifically about load paths and clearances until they found the approach that satisfied both of them. It was a good argument, the kind that ended with better work than either of them would have done alone. Afterward, Gideon made coffee on the camp stove he kept in the cabin, and they sat on the porch in the midday sun, and Brenna noticed that the porch no longer felt like a construction site. It felt like a porch. The distinction was subtle but real. 3 weeks on the interior, she said. Maybe 4, depending on the plastering. You're hiring a plasterer? There's a man in Flagstaff I've used before. I'll send for him when the lathe is on. He looked at his coffee. Finish carpentry after that. Doors, window sash, moldings. Cabinet work in the kitchen? Yes. He looked at her. That's your territory. She had not done a lot of cabinet work. Her father's specialty had been structural carpentry, post and beam, heavy timber. Cabinets were finish work, requiring a different tolerance, a different feel for wood movement and proportion. She was competent. She was not, by her own accounting, exceptional at it yet. I'll get better at it, she said. I know you will, he said, and the directness of it, the certainty, no qualification, settled something in her she hadn't known was unsettled. But the change in town happened the way most real changes happen, not in a single moment, but in accumulation. Small things, individually dismissible, that together meant something had shifted. Aldous Grubb at the hardware store no longer looked at the wall behind her. He looked at her, and while he wasn't what anyone would call warm, he was professional, and the orders she placed were ready when he said they'd be ready. She didn't ask him about it. The reason didn't matter much. Fowles at the lumberyard volunteered unprompted that a shipment of oak flooring she'd inquired about had arrived 2 days early. Porter from the committee, the feed mill man who'd moved to close the personnel inquiry, stopped her on Main Street one afternoon to say, simply and without ceremony, that he thought the build was looking well. He said it the way a man says something he's been meaning to say and finally decided to say. She thanked him and kept walking. The most unexpected thing was Ruth Whitmore. Brenna was at the general store buying sandpaper when Ruth came in. They had not been in the same room since the committee meeting. They had certainly never spoken directly. Ruth Whitmore was a woman of considerable local consequence, and she had made that consequence felt in the way she'd deployed her social network against the build, against the project, against Brenna specifically. Brenna continued shopping. She was aware of Ruth across the store the way you're aware of weather, not staring at it, but tracking it. Ruth came to the counter at the same time. They stood 2 feet apart waiting for the store clerk. Then Ruth said, "The window frames, on the east side. Are those white oak?" Brenna looked at her. Yes. Ruth was quiet for a moment. She had a quality up close that was different from the quality she projected at a distance. Still formidable, but more complicated. The look of a woman who had made a decision and was in the middle of executing it and was not entirely comfortable with the execution. "It's a good choice," Ruth said. "Oak weathers well." Brenna said nothing for a moment. She was deciding something. "Eleanor Mercer wanted oak," she finally said. Gideon made sure she got it. Ruth's expression shifted. Something moved through it quickly, and what came after it was harder to read. Not guilt exactly. More like the look of someone who has been carrying a position they've started to find heavy. "I didn't know that," she said. "Most people don't," Brenna said. The clerk came. They each made their purchase. Ruth left first, with the particular straightness of a woman who had said what she came to say and was satisfied she'd said it, even if what she'd said had been just 3 sentences about wood. Brenna walked out into the street and stood for a moment with her sandpaper, turning it over in her hands. She thought, people are strange. They build walls and then they find small doors in them. They come at you sideways because coming at you straight requires admitting something they're not ready to admit. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, the small door is enough. She put the sandpaper in her bag and went back to work. What? The letter arrived on a Thursday morning in early autumn, when the cottonwoods had started going yellow at the edges and the mornings had enough bite in them that she wore her father's work coat on the walk out to the site. It was from a man named Harwick, a master carpenter in Cheyenne, whom she'd apprenticed under briefly 3 years back before her father got sick. Harwick was 67 and he was retiring, and he had a workshop, tools, equipment, accounts, client relationships, that he needed to place with someone he trusted. He was offering it to her. The letter was 2 pages, specific and without sentiment, the way Harwick always communicated. The workshop was established. The accounts were good. There was a house included, a proper house, not a room at a hotel. He wanted someone who would run it as a legitimate shop, not sell off the equipment. He had thought of several people, he wrote, and come back to her name each time. She read it twice, standing at the kitchen table in the cabin. Gideon was already at the site, and then she folded it carefully and put it in her coat pocket and stood for a while looking at nothing in particular. A workshop in Cheyenne. Real independence, the kind built on established foundations rather than started from nothing. Equipment she hadn't had to buy, accounts she hadn't had to build, the thing she had been working toward, in the abstract, since her father died. A place that was hers. A trade that was fully hers. She went to the site and worked all morning without saying anything about it. The interior lath work was demanding enough to occupy most of her attention, which was both convenient and insufficient. The letter sat in her coat pocket with a weight that had nothing to do with paper. At noon, when they stopped to eat, she gave it to Gideon. He read it. She watched his face while he read it, the careful attention he brought to documents, the way his eyes moved down the lines. When he finished, he folded it and held it for a moment without giving it back. "Harwick," he said. "He was a good teacher, honest man. If he says the accounts are solid, they're solid." "Cheyenne." He set the letter on the porch boards between them. 2 days' ride, she said. 3 if the weather's bad. He looked at the letter, then at the build site, the framed house, the walls going up around them, the yellow cottonwoods beyond. The quality of the noon light was different from the afternoon light, flatter and more direct, but the property was beautiful in it regardless. "This is what you came out here for," he said. "A place of your own in the trade." "It's what I thought I was looking for." He looked at her then. The steadiness she knew, but with something more exposed in it than usual. Gideon Mercer was not a man who made himself easy to read, but right now he wasn't working at being unreadable. "What do you mean, thought?" he said. She picked up the letter, turned it over in her hands. "I've been thinking about it since this morning, trying to be honest about what I actually want, not just what I've been telling myself I want for 2 years. She looked at him. "When I left my last town, the 14th one, I was pretty much done. Not with the work, with the fighting to be allowed to do the work. I thought if I could get somewhere I owned, where the shop was mine and nobody could hold a nail order over my head or file a complaint about my qualifications." She stopped. "I thought that was it. That was the whole answer. And now?" She was quiet for a moment. The yellow cottonwood leaves moved in the noon wind. A hawk somewhere above the south ridge, working the thermals. "Owning a workshop doesn't solve the problem of being alone in it," she finally said. Gideon was very still. "I'm not saying I'm not going to take it," she said carefully. "I'm saying I'm not sure what I want anymore, and I'd rather tell you that honestly than pretend it's simple." She looked at him. "What would you do?" "If I went." He was quiet for a while, long enough that she thought he might not answer directly, and she would have understood that. She'd learned to understand his silences. But then he said, "I'd finish the house." A pause. "And it would be done. And that would be, it would be what it was supposed to be. Done." Another pause, longer. "And then I'd have a house, and nothing particular to do with myself." It wasn't a declaration. He wasn't a man who made declarations. But it was honest in the specific, unadorned way he was honest about everything. And that honesty was its own kind of weight. "I've been alone a long time," he said. "I know how to do it. I was doing it before you got here." He looked at her directly. "But I know the difference now between before and since you got here." She held his gaze. Outside, the cottonwoods went on moving in the wind. The lath on the interior walls waited for them to come back and finish the day's work. "Give me a few days," she said. "Take what you need," he said. He picked up his tools and went back inside. She walked a lot in those few days. Morning walks before the site work and evening walks after, on roads she'd been walking for 2 months now and knew well enough to manage in the dark. She walked the east road. She walked the south road out to where the territory opened up into wide, flat grazing land. She walked the edges of Red Mesa in the early morning when the town was still mostly asleep and the streets belonged to no one in particular. She thought about her father. She thought about the 14 towns. She thought about being 22 and sitting in a lawyer's office in Tucson listening to the inventory of what was left after a life, and $43 and a toolbox being the answer. She thought about what she'd wanted then, raw and specific, to be taken seriously, to have a place in a trade she'd been raised to love, to not have to fight for the basic acknowledgement that she could do the work. Those wants were real, and they weren't small, and she hadn't been wrong to carry them. But she'd been carrying them the way you carry things when you're walking away from something. Head down, not looking up, focused on the distance because the distance was the point. Get far enough away and you'd be somewhere the past couldn't reach. She knew, walking the south road one evening with the last light going gold over the grass, that wasn't how distance worked. You didn't walk far enough and arrive somewhere safe. You walked until you found something worth stopping for. She thought about the stair tread she'd cut within a 16th of an inch, alone on the site, because that was the standard the house deserved. She thought about planning scratched letters out of sheathing without being asked. She thought about a warm parcel from a woman whose husband worked for the man trying to destroy what they were building.
She thought about Marsh and his father, who'd been run off a job. She thought about Vera leaving food on a closed cabin door twice a week and not asking for anything. She thought about Gideon standing in the main room doorway, looking at light that wasn't there anymore. And the thing she'd understood in that moment, that some people build because it's the only way they know to keep something alive. She stopped walking. She was at the edge of the East Road, the cottonwoods in front of her, the house visible through them in the early dark, a lamp burning in the cabin window. She stood there for a while. Then she went home. Yum. She wrote to Harwick the next morning. She thanked him, genuinely, in detail, because he deserved that. And she declined. She told him she had work where she was. She told him she thought he'd find the right person for the shop because he was good at finding the right person for things. She wished him well in his retirement and meant it. She sealed the letter and gave it to the postwriter and did not stand there watching it go. Then she walked the 2 miles to the build site and got to work. Gideon was on the second floor when she arrived, checking the plumb on the bedroom partition with a level. He heard her come up the stairs she'd built, and looked over his shoulder. "You're here," he said. "I wrote Harwick this morning." A pause. "And? I'm staying." She set her toolbox down. "I want to be clear, not because you need me here to finish the house. You'd finish it. It might take longer and the cabinet work might not be as good, but you'd finish it." She looked at him. "I'm staying because I want to. Because this is the first place in 2 years that has felt like something I'm part of, rather than something I'm fighting to get into." She paused. "And because the work here is good, and I'd rather do good work with someone who understands it than do any work alone." Gideon looked at her for a long moment. The morning light was coming through the bedroom partition's door opening, laying a bright rectangle across the rough subfloor between them. "All right," he said. "That's it? All right?" "What else would I say?" She almost laughed. "Most people would say more." "I'm not most people," he said, and turned back to his level, and she picked up her tools and they went to work. It was, she thought, exactly the right amount of words. The house was finished on a Thursday in late October, when the cottonwoods were at their fullest yellow and the air had the cool, clean quality that high-elevation autumn produces. Bright and still, the sky a hard blue above the red rock rises. The plasterer from Flagstaff had come and gone, leaving clean white walls throughout. The cabinet work in the kitchen was done. She'd taken her time with it, worked carefully, and it was better than she'd expected, not because she'd gotten suddenly exceptional, but because she'd finally stopped being nervous about it and let herself do what she knew how to do. The doors were hung and plumb. The window sash fit cleanly in the white oak frames. The moldings ran true around every opening. They walked through it together that morning, room by room, starting in the entry hall and going up the stairs she'd built, and through the bedrooms and back down, and through the main room and the kitchen and out onto the porch. It was a slow walk, the way you walk through something you've built, checking, noting, finding the 2 or 3 things that needed attention and the many things that didn't. In the main room, Gideon stood in the spot she'd first seen him standing, the doorway spot, where the afternoon light came through the white oak window frames and lay itself across the floor. He stood there and looked at it, and she stood back and let him. He was quiet for a long time. "She would have liked it," he said finally. "I think she would have loved it," Brenna said. He turned and looked at her, and his expression was the most open she'd ever seen it, all the compression and containment gone, not because the grief was gone, but because the grief had found a place to live that wasn't in the way of everything else. That was the thing about grief she'd learned from watching him. It didn't go away. It found a shape, it became part of the structure rather than a force against it. "Thank you," he said, "for all of it." "Thank my father," she said. "He built the toolkit." "I'm thanking you." She held his gaze. "You're welcome." They finished the walkthrough. The last item on her informal list was the porch railing, which had a section near the east end that she'd noticed had slightly more flex than she wanted. She got her tools and fixed it while Gideon made coffee inside, and when she was done, she tested it with both hands, leaning her weight into it, and it held solid. She put her tools away. Gideon came out with 2 cups of coffee, and they sat on the porch steps. The finished porch steps, with their proper risers and their hardwood treads, and they drank the coffee and looked at the cottonwoods and the rock rises beyond,
and the wide blue sky over all of it. After a while, Gideon said, "I want to talk to you about something." She waited. "I've been thinking about the workshop space in the back of the property, the old tool shed." He looked at his coffee. "It's a decent structure. Stone foundation, good roof. With some work, it could be a proper carpentry shop. Workbenches, storage, a drying rack for lumber." He looked at her. "Your shop, if you wanted it." She was quiet. "Not wages," he said. "Not a job I'm offering. Yours. Your name on it. Your accounts. Your clients. Built from here." He paused. "Red Mesa needs a carpenter, a real one. The work is there. And you—" He stopped, chose his words. "You shouldn't have to build someone else's thing your whole life and call it enough." She looked at the cottonwoods. Their yellow was extraordinary in the morning light. That particular gold that only lasts a few weeks and then is gone until next year. She thought about what she'd understood on the South Road that evening, that you walk until you find something worth stopping for. She thought about her father's toolkit, 40 pounds of carefully maintained steel, and what it meant that she'd carried it from Tucson through 14 towns and set it down here and picked it up every morning for 2 months and done work she was proud of. She thought, a place that's mine, built from here. "The shed'll need a new door," she said. "The current one is hanging wrong. I could see it from the first day." Gideon looked at her. "And the workbench will need to be built from scratch. The platform in there isn't level." She looked at him. "But the bones are good." "They are," he said. "Then yes," she said. "I want it." He nodded once. The short, definite nod. She knew by now what that nod meant. Not just agreement, but something settled, something decided, something that was going to hold. They sat with their coffee and the cottonwoods in the morning light, and the house was finished behind them, and the shed was waiting to become something, and the East Road ran back toward Red Mesa, where a town that had tried to push her out had instead, slowly and incompletely, and without entirely meaning to, begun to let her in. The workshop opened in November, after 3 weeks of work that she did mostly herself, with Gideon passing materials and occasionally holding one end of something long. She built the workbench from scratch, a full torsion box top, flat within the tolerances she'd been trained to, with a tail vise on the right end and a leg vise on the left. She built the tool storage wall herself, each holder sized for a specific tool, the same system her father had used. She hung a new door, properly, plumb and square, with the gap consistent around the full perimeter. She lettered the sign herself with a small brush and paint she'd bought from the general store, where Grubb had asked, without quite managing to make it casual, if she was planning to stay in Red Mesa long term. She'd told him yes. He'd said he was glad to hear it, and it was awkward, and she appreciated the awkwardness because awkward was honest. The sign read, B. Hale, Carpentry and Joinery. Her father's initials had been CH. Hers were BH. 2 letters difference between his work and hers, and everything else the same. She nailed it above the door on a cold November morning, with Vera and Marsh and Clara Sims watching from a few feet away. Gideon was beside her on the ladder, steadying it. He didn't need to steady it. It was a good ladder. She'd checked it herself. But he steadied it anyway, and she let him. Doc Farwell came by an hour later and stood in the doorway looking at the workbench and told her it was well built. Abel Marsh examined the tail vise with the interest of a craftsman looking at another craftsman's solution and said the mechanism was clean. Vera brought food, because Vera always brought food, and they ate it standing in the new workshop among the smell of sawdust and fresh paint and the particular dry warmth of an enclosed space that someone has just made their own. Red Mesa was not transformed. She was not naive enough to think a workshop sign changed everything. There were still people in town who looked past her, who had always looked past her, who had organized their understanding of the world in a way that couldn't accommodate what she was without causing too much internal disruption. She'd made her peace with that. You couldn't sand down every surface. You worked with the material you had. But there were more people who looked at her now than had looked at her in October. More people who said her name on the street without the particular hesitation that used to come before it. More people who had looked at the finished house on the East Road. And word had traveled, the way word travels in small towns, through every available channel, and drawn their own conclusions about the quality of the work and the character of the person who had done it. Work was the argument she'd always made. Work was the argument that held. So, on a December evening, when the cold had come in properly and the first snow of the season was sitting on the rock rises to the north, Brenna was in the workshop finishing a set of cabinet doors for a client on the south end of town, her second paying client, after the hardware store owner's wife who'd commissioned a set of kitchen shelves and been satisfied enough to tell 2 people about it. She was working by lamplight, the workshop warm from the small stove in the corner, the wood grain coming up clean under her plane. She heard footsteps on the path and looked up. Gideon came through the door, stamping snow off his boots. He was carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Getting cold," he said. "I noticed." He set 1 cup near her bench and leaned against the door frame with his own, looking at the cabinet doors she was working. She watched him look. The particular quality of attention he gave to work that interested him, the same attention he'd given her father's toolkit on that first day. "Good grain match," he said about the doors. "I was lucky with the board selection. Came from the same log." "That's not luck. That's knowing what to look for." She picked up her coffee. Outside, through the workshop's small window, she could see the house, the finished house, its windows lit from inside where a lamp burned in the main room. It looked the way a house should look in December, inhabited and warm against the dark. "I've been thinking," Gideon said. "About what?" He looked at the house and then back at her. He had the look of a man who had thought something through carefully and was now in the process of deciding whether he'd thought it through carefully enough. It was a look she recognized because she'd seen it before difficult decisions, before structural solutions that required commitment. "I think," he said carefully, "that I'd like you to live in the house, not the hotel, not the workshop." He looked at her directly. "In the house, with me." The workshop was very quiet. The stove ticked. Outside, snow was coming off the north ridge in a thin curtain. She set her plane down. "That's a significant thing to say," she said. "I know. I've been in Red Mesa 3 months. I know that too. And you're not—" She searched for the right words. "You're not a man who says things without meaning them." "No, I'm not." She looked at him. This serious, solitary man who had built a house for a woman he'd lost and kept building it after she was gone because stopping would have been a different kind of loss. Who had stood beside her in a committee room and told 5 men that she belonged on that job site because she had earned it, who had driven through the dark to find an 81-year-old man in Haverstock County and come back with a notarized statement and the look of someone who had ridden hard and was not done riding, who had steadied a ladder he didn't need to steady because he wanted to be next to her while she hung her sign. She thought about the 14 towns. She thought about what she'd said to him, that this was the first place in 2 years that felt like something she was part of. She hadn't been entirely wrong about what she wanted back in Tucson with the $43 and the toolbox. She'd wanted to be taken seriously. She'd wanted a place in something real. She'd wanted to do work that mattered and have it recognized. She'd gotten all of that. Not easily, and not without cost, but she'd gotten it. What she hadn't known to want, what she hadn't had the experience to want because she'd never had it, was this. A person who looked at what she was and said yes, exactly that. Not despite the stubbornness and the 40-pound toolbox and the 14 towns, because of them. "The workshop stays mine," she said. "My accounts, my clients? Of course. And I'm going to keep walking to the site on the days we're working. I like the walk." 2 miles, he said. "I like the walk," she repeated. Something changed in his face. Not dramatic. Gideon Mercer was not a man built for drama, but something that had been held carefully for a long time settled, like a frame finding plumb, like a joint drawn tight. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. She picked her plane back up because the cabinet doors weren't going to finish themselves, and Gideon sat down on the stool near the stove with his coffee, and the workshop was warm and the snow was coming off the north ridge, and the house outside the window held its light against the December dark. There's a thing about belonging that nobody warns you about when you're young and moving fast, and certain that belonging is the one thing the world won't give you. They warn you about the hardship. They warn you about the people who will try to take things from you. They warn you about the long roads and the closed doors and the weight of carrying your whole life in a toolbox from one unwelcoming town to the next. What they don't tell you is that belonging doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive with any particular ceremony or clarity. It arrives in the accumulation of ordinary things: a cup of coffee handed over without ceremony, a nod that means more than it says, a workshop with your name on the door, and a workbench built to your own specification. It arrives in the moment you realize you've stopped calculating how far it is to the next town because you've stopped needing the next town to exist. Brenna Hale was 24 years old when she came to Red Mesa with a dead man's toolbox and no plan beyond the next job. She had been told, in 14 different ways in 14 different places, that the world was not built for people like her, and that the best she could do was find the narrow spaces between what was permitted and what was possible and work quietly inside them. She had not worked quietly. She had worked well, which is a different thing entirely, and she had refused to be the size that other people needed her to be. And it had cost her, and she was still here, and the cost had been worth paying. Strength, she'd learned, real strength, not the kind you perform but the kind you actually have, is not the absence of fear or the absence of loss or the absence of days when you wonder if any of it is worth it. It is the decision, made again every morning, to pick up the tools and go back to work, to fix the thing rather than manage around it, to build something true even when the ground beneath it is contested. She had come to Red Mesa to build a house. She had built one. And in the building of it, without planning to, without knowing it was happening until it had already happened, she had built something else entirely. Something she had not known she needed. Something she had not known how to name. Something that felt, standing in a warm workshop on a December evening with snow on the ridge and lamplight in the window and her father's plane in her hand, like the thing people mean when they stop moving and say, "Here, this is the place. This is where I'm home."